Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to StarryTelling. This is where we explore the stories, myth, and magic of the starry skies. We're so happy to be here with all of you. Thank you so much for joining. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Amanda Poole Walsh. I am the founder of Astrology Hub and the host of this show, and I am here with astrologer and sacred astronomy expert, Gemini Brett. And today we're going to be talking some Mercury retrograde and going into some of the mythology behind Mercury retrograde, which is very exciting. We're going to review our sky-venger hunt from last week, and then we're going to get our new sky-venger hunt for next week. So Brett, we can start with that review. Essentially, we've been in this process of working with the sun and the moon, so the luminaries, right? And feeling in our body where they are in the sky so we can actually feel the aspects. And so that's one part of the assignment. And then last week you added on to the assignment the added element of reflecting on the reflection of the sun's light on the moon. And if it's
reflections all the way down, right? So like as I am observing the moon, knowing that she's reflecting sunlight to earth. And last time we went on this whole incarnational idea of Diana delivering Apollo's birth and moon as soul reflecting the one light of spirit in a unique way, right? So, and as I've said before, like literally, I don't have to add Mercury, Venus, Mars, all the beings to the chart to show you that just with the sun and moon and earth, like where you are on earth, every moment is entirely unique. The moon will never deliver the sunlight to the earth in the same exact way twice ever, right? You can't.
That is the coolest thing ever. I mean, that's because we've heard our astrology chart is as unique as our fingerprints. You know, that there's no other fingerprint, there's no other chart like yours, there's no other fingerprints like yours. And to have the astronomical explanation of that and why it's true is really powerful.
Yeah, and you have to learn a lot of things about the moon to see that. But that's true. I mean, you start adding the other planets and like the probability, it just becomes so minuscule. You are you. We all know that, right? But it's nice to have something to like meet the rationalists with too. But anyway, in a set of 12, right? So for example, today, right? The sun is right here where I am. Mm-hmm. And the sun is in the sign of Aquarius. And the moon's in Libra, which she hasn't risen yet because she's in the waning half of her cycle, right? So I'll kind of rewind part of this practice, like the embodiment of the lunar phase in the waxing fortnight or 2 weeks from new moon to full moon. It's best to kind of go to the setting sun and hold that sun in your hand and then just point to where the moon is and hold that, and so this would be like the semi-sextile and the sextile and the square. And you can just feel as the moon is waxing away from the sun, you can feel it opening up your body. And you can see in the changing phase, of course, the moon is growing in light as she gets further from the sun as she's waxing. And you can see like what a sextile looks like and what a trine looks like. I mean, it's just an amazing thing. Once you get to the full moon, which is the opposition, and that means full moon is rising at sunset, right? And setting at sunrise. After that time, as the moon's now approaching, like coming back to the sun, right? The waning half in her face, her smile starts shrinking a little. Then it's best to go at sunrise, right?
Because that's a huge point. That's a huge point. Yeah.
Point, right? Because like after, like right as the sun is rising, let's say the moon is like a couple of days after full, the moon's going to be over here in the west, and then she'll set right after sunrise. And so the general rule is you can see the waxing moon before sunset, and you can see the waning moon before sunrise or after sunrise and before sunrise. And we're going to get into this a little bit more as we move along a little bit today, but also very much next week. I think like the difference between an evening star and a morning star. Because if you see the moon after sunset, it's like coming into the night. Mm-hmm. You go see the moon before sunrise, which is a beautiful thing to experience, right? Now that I can see the west from this place, like I'll be working early in the morning, the moon's right there. It's so cool. Mm-hmm. Well, what is that for the one that I witnessed before the day begins, before the sun rises? There's a very different kind of energy between morning star and evening star, if you will.
Yeah. And Brett, another takeaway from last week was this visual of the sun's rays and all of us being we are the sun's rays. Like we're not separate from it. We're just extensions of this one light. I have not been able to look at the sun and the rays of the sun without thinking of that since you brought that up. So that was another really powerful thing you said. And the moon actually can have beams like that too, like rays that come off like that too, which has also been fun to look at.
Especially
And it was,
in Hawaii.
yes. And it was really fun with my daughter, Sophia, to do okay, if we're in Aquarius and that's a full moon, what sign is the full moon in? And how do you know? So that was fun to play with too, with my daughters. So
yeah. And so this is the big, right. So how does so we just had the Leo full moon. How does Leo reflect Aquarius light? And you feel, there are two sides of a pole. They actually used to call that the diameter, the opposition.
I know, that's the coolest thing. You said that last week. Instead of an opposition, the diameter, which seems way more. I mean, they're both accurate, but
etymologically related.
Right.
But which isn't my forte, but I know that to be true. But yeah, and then also just like the radii, radius, right? Like I love that. And when we get more into like the sacred number of the moon, trippy things go down there. So I'm gonna leave that alone for now. So yeah, the other piece of it is this, right? So like, how does Leo reflect Aquarius, right? And now we're in a place where the moon is trine sun, at least by sign. You basically get 144 combinations, right? So while the sun is in Aquarius, it can be reflected by an Aquarius moon, which is a new moon. You don't really see it unless it's just that sliver of Diana's bow. Mm-hmm. And then Pisces reflecting Aquarius, right? Aries reflecting Aquarius, Taurus reflecting Aquarius is the square, right? Gemini reflecting Aquarius is the trine. So you can just see like these aspects that we're learning on a chart, like really just open up. And it's only the moon who we can see, like actually show us the size of that aspect in her face, But so today we're at, here's that Aquarius sun and it's the trine the other way. So the Libra moon, and I can just see the sun's going to set and then the moon hasn't risen yet and the sun has to go down there and now the moon's rising and where the moon's going to be at sunrise. But to add the archetypes, I can just really tonight like stare at that Libra moon. The stars will tell me that she's in Libra, but I can say, wait a second, like I'm looking at Aquarius sunlight reflected. And really importantly, we're actually doing the three things, right? Because I'm seeing the moon reflect sunlight to Earth. I'm looking through earthly eyes, right? So it's these three things, Earth, Moon, and Sun. Mm. So how does Libra reflect Aquarius? And there's a gazillion answers, but one I would say is like Libra is consideration, like diplomacy, balance, harmony. So what is the harmony that is offered when we Aquarius? Right, which is a really interesting story because Aquarius can be very revolutionary, wants change, right? I mean, we can say like Aquarius reflecting Libra in some ways, okay? So that's the other side of this thing, right? So if I'm balanced, if I'm willing to walk a mile in your moccasins, if I'm like willing to look in your eyes and consider your side of the thing, and like that's revolutionary. That's one of actually the great gifts of astrology. It's like sometimes we feel like we're being seen for the first time and it just breaks, that's like Aquarius reflecting Libra, or even like, very important revolutions like equal pay or equality, right? That's like a Libra need that Aquarius will activate. You see what I mean?
Totally. And the thing that you just brought up about the Libra reflecting to the Aquarius, can I walk in your shoes? That's bringing a very human element to an Aquarian energy that can sometimes be a little detached from the emotional or empathic side of the equation. But that ability to say, hey, like if you walk in my shoes, then we can actually figure out what's better for all of us.
Right. But see, that's starting in Libra, right?
Right.
Or Cancer, or Capricorn. There's other places where that's happening, right?
Right.
But when we're starting in Aquarius, right, which, yeah, it wants to be rational to the most like beautiful expression of that word. It really wants to make change that matters, So if we do that, how does that bring balance? Right. And I mean, it's an interesting trine because shaking things up tends to not be so harmonious, you know, and it's interesting to see also that that trine is in like the waning half, if you will, right? It's like, oh, you got to shake things up and deal with it, and then harmony will be found.
Yeah, because if you are to shake something up like a bottle with stuff in it, at first it's going to be not harmonious, but then it's going to settle and potentially be even more harmonious.
Love it. Yeah, it's a very beautiful look. Yeah, so that's the general idea. You know, the next sign, the moon will be in Scorpio, reflecting Aquarius light. So how does Scorpio reflect Aquarius to Earth? And so basically what we're doing is we're really focusing in on relations and relationship. You know, I mean, this of itself in a way is like a Libra exercise. But it's just to look at the moon and say, well, okay, like tomorrow, whatever, Scorpio moon. Oh, but I see, I'm looking at Aquarius light reflected in your face, right? And the same is true. Like if I'm looking at, Mars and Aries right now, I'm looking at Aquarius sun reflected through that unique red mirror called Mars and feeling into that. And you start learning cycles, right? So if we remember back, it's going to be a bit of what we do today with Mercury retrograde. We've got to bring it back. The first episode where we started a few weeks ago, and the sky-venger hunt was, okay, go out to the west, because magically at this time, Jupiter and Saturn are both disappearing as Mercury appears. Okay. And it's only been a few weeks since then. And the scene is very different today. You can't see any of those characters in the West. And I guess before I tell this story about Mercury, we can kind of decode some of the astronomy of it. I mean, let's talk about Mercury retrograde a little bit. There's just so much to it. And it's one thing that we hear so often, you know, like maybe people are coming into the 12 signs and sun sign astrology. Maybe the second most popular thing is new moon and full moons, because a lot of people, I think, as it should be, are tuning their transmissions to, you know, the phases of the moon and that. And maybe number 3 is Mercury retrograde. Right. Who interestingly retrogrades, this is his mudra in like the Kundalini, right? All the planets. This is the Mercury finger is the pinky. So we grab the pinky and you get the 3. And Mercury retrogrades about 3 times a year, right? 3 weeks at a time. So you get all this interesting Hermes number playing. You know, it's even more interesting. It's not 3 times a year, his cycles, pi times a year. Like for real.
It's pi times a year. How many times Mercury retrograde happens?
Right, yeah.
Wow.
So, right? This guy, I mean, this gal, whatever, such a magician, right? And so pi, of course, is the thing that connects the rays to the circle, right? If you want to know the circumference of a circle, really, if you really want to know, you have to cut it and stretch it out and measure it, because we can only measure lines, right? So what we do with a circle, of course, is we take the radius or multiply by 2, so it's a diameter, and then multiply that times pi. And so pi is this cool thing. And I think I mentioned this last time, I can't remember, but from the source of a river at the mountaintop to its destiny at the sea, right? So if you, as a crow flies from the source to the sea on a line, right, you multiply that times pi and you get the actual length of the river with all of its curves. So this isn't just some like made up thing, you know, this is in the fabric of the universe. And of course, Mercury, who brought us letters, who brought us numbers, right, is going to do number magic in the way that he dances with Earth, right? Wow. Or how we see it is how Mercury's dancing with the sun. And Mercury brings us letters. That's like most, we know, we call this thing, you know, playing along with Mercury retrograde. Most people, I feel like, are magically working to get played by Mercury retrograde.
True.
It's my general opinion that the planets really miss us, that it wasn't long ago where people in general, I imagine, I don't know, but we're just treating them as gods and goddesses. And we're participating with them as such. And I think as astrologers, we're doing this very much on a chart, and many of us have started to do this in the sky, right? Like, oh, that Saturn, Jupiter, it's like something to behold. It's this gathering, you know. And so I think Mercury really digs it when his name is called, right? Like, oh my God, they're talking about me. Like, where you guys been? And it's like, what do you want? What can I do for you? Oh, you want me to like break up your internet? And what do you want me to mess up your bank accounts? That's weird. You want me to make your car break down and blow up your computer? Like, these are really weird requests, you know? You want to like not be able to have clear communication for a while? Like, if that's what you need, I gotcha. You know what I mean? Wow. It's just like, wow. Because that's the kind of magic that it seems to be. And you see all the scapegoat memes and everything gets blamed on Mercury retrograde, you know, and a computer thing will fail. Like when Mercury's very much direct, thank you very much. And it's, oh no, that's like the shadow of the shadow of the shadow of the Mercury retrograde. And, you know, I mean, Mercury spends a third of his time, well, in like within these shadow periods. So for me, this is a very true thing. Like let's say this is Mercury. Okay, I gotta get a little closer to see his glyph. The one that has the three parts of the philosophy of the whole world, right? The crescent of soul and the circle of spirit and the cross of matter. And let's say you are Earth and my face is the sun. Okay, this is what Mercury retrograde is. It's Mercury passing Earth by. No matter if you're talking about the interior decorators, as I like to call Mercury and Venus, or the outer planets, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, beyond, the middle of a planet's retrograde period means that Earth is closest to that planet. So like, he's like, it's like, you know, the mailman's bringing the letters right now, right? Or, you know, I was told when Santa comes around that I should like make a wish list and I should bring offerings, right? You bring the cookies, you bring the carrots for the reindeer, and you bring the wish list. And if you've been nice, like maybe it's going to get hooked up, right? Like, why aren't we doing that with Mercury? Why all the hate mail? Like, what offerings have anybody who's listening, what have you brought to Mercury today? Right? And I bet you there's a lot of answers to that question, actually, but do it intentionally, right? So this sky-venger hunt for this week is going to be a little bit more like soul work, you know, a la Astrology Hub's Inner Circle. For those of you who are engaged with the amazing monthly play of the Inner Circle, you will know that the teacher of the month, the guide of the month, brings different exercises around. And this will be on Monday next. So the day before we next meet, Amanda, when Mercury aligns between Earth and Sun, right? So it's like, if my face is Sun and you out there who's watching our Earth, it's right there, okay? Although probably here or there, Mercury only actually is visibly seen passing between the Earth and the Sun every 6 or 7-ish years. We just had one November 11th, 2019. They always happen in Scorpio or Taurus. But anyway, know that he is, as they said in the day, Kazemi, like in the throne room, in the heart of it. It's a very strange thing when you tune into like traditional astrology. It's like, yeah, when a planet's too close to the sun, it's called under the beams, it kind of weakens the planet. Right? Because think about like what we've been saying with the moon, like the moon delivers sunlight to Earth. Well, what if we can't see her? What if she's new? And of course, for the moon, that's a monthly happening, right? She's like literally the mirror of the moon is sending the light back to the sun. And it's much more of like a pure solar experience, like, you know. And so when a planet gets so close, like in the sense that in the planets are so much more than this, but in the sense that the planets are unique mirrors for the sunlight. Right? So that Mercury mirror is gone. And so I think this is akin to this idea traditionally that that's like a weaker Mercury, you know, like, and then, so that's traditionally in Hellenistic astrology, it's usually people say 15 degrees on either side of the sun. And then within about 8.5 degrees, it's called combust, right? We have to be careful with classical astrology because it just sounds like good and bad. And like, but that's like, there's just no way in heck you're seeing that planet. But then suddenly, when they get within 1 degree on either side, it's like the most magical thing. right? So when Anna and I found this house, it was Mercury retrograde. It was right before that November 11th, 2019 thing. It was like, we looked at a lot of houses and we're like, we like that. It can work. I can do my astronomy thing here. It feels good, right? You can see the sunlight on my face right now. And, but we was like, when are we going to do this? Well, if you're going to pitch during Mercury retrograde, at least make it when Mercury is conjoined the sun. Mm. And so we did. And to tell you the truth, we have definitely had some like appliance issues. Somebody stole, even though it's like, you know, seems like a nice neighborhood, somebody stole the catalytic converter from my car here. Right. So Mercury cars, like, interesting, right? Like there's some things where it's like, oh, maybe we should have listened to astrology. That's like, don't do, you know, just hide under a rock.
Brett, nothing has happened with my car for years. And yesterday I got in it and it wouldn't start. I was like, wow. And I haven't been cursing Mercury, I promise. I haven't been cursing, but it's, you know, how much of it is us sort of absorbing too some of the ideas and not even consciously projecting those out at times. And then how much of it is just totally legitimate. Like that's just what happens.
So let's talk about a couple of models where it is legitimate, right? Because we have seen this. Like, I mean, you know, people argue that this is like statistically noticeable. I mean, of course, we can go, just as you said, like, you haven't been cursing Mercury. Maybe it's because you're in the astrology field and you're going to see the memes popping up. And, yeah, you know, as long as, like, as intentional as I've been around this, I have found that when I'm with astrologers, it all like dissolves. Because, like, you know, I went to an astrology conference during Mercury retrograde and I was so intentional about, I'm going to keep these things pure and I'm going to bring the offerings and the wish list, which I'll talk more about doing. And, but then I walked into a room where everybody's telling their Mercury retrograde jokes. And I'm now in a field where that is just gone, right? I got a rental car, flat tire during a Mercury retrograde, rushing back to hang out with like an astrology crew. You know, so, you know, there's a chance that if we are manifesting these things astrologically dictated, that field will expand exponentially when we are around astrologers in astrological community, right? From the sense that maybe this isn't just like pure physics, and maybe we're just kind of manifesting this experience that we are expecting to experience. Right? Which is always a challenge with astrology. That's why looking back to things in your life before you knew anything about astrology seems to be a little bit of better science in regards to, you know, how do these planets influence us and all that.
Right. Because once we know, now we're entering into more of a co-creative space. It just is. But yeah, and it is very helpful to go back and look. And also that's why I think a lot of people look at horoscopes and forecasts and things after they've already happened. I know I used to do that all the time. I would look back at the week before just to be like, how much of that actually happened before I knew what was supposed to happen.
And what is time? Because now you've come to astrology. Doesn't that mean like little girl Amanda was already there? Right. So there's a lot of ways we can play with this thing.
That's true. Can you tell the story now? Should we go into the story?
Well, yeah, let me do a few more things here and then we will. So, right. So, you know, a model would be, let's again say that my face is the sun. And there's this, like, there was an image I showed last week with just like the sun at the center of the circumpunct, but then just like many different ripples, different concentric circles around that one dot.
Brett, can you spell that word circumpunct? You kept saying it and I always wanted to see it. How do you spell
it? That's the symbol for the sun. It's right. CIRCUMPUNCT. Yes, circumpunct. That's a name, the monad. I mean, there's so many different names for it, but that's what I was taught it is. But yeah, if you look at just like a dot, like a ripple pool, right? You drop a little stone in a still pond and you get these beautiful concentric rings. And I sometimes think of that, like the sun is like, you know, the center of the ripple tank. And Earth is just surfing on its wave, man. You know, and it's all good. But what happens in like a ripple pool, if you bring something in between you and the source, you literally get an interference pattern. Right. And actually, interestingly, if you put something like, let's say Earth is surfing on this little ripple wave and Mars is like right on the other side of Earth, right? So this would be Sun opposite Mars in our chart. And that's the middle of Mars's retrograde. That's Earth passing Mars by. You also get an interference pattern, whether the thing is between you or on the other side. So on that level, now, I mean, is space actually a ripple pool with the sun as the rock that was dropped in the stove? No, but you know, there is definitely a living metaphor here where we can see some physics maybe suggesting that when Mercury comes between the sun and us, there is like an interference pattern that happens. And why would Mercury's interference be different than Mars? Well, proximity, all sorts of things, right? Another thing I could say is like, literally the middle of any planet's retrograde is Earth closest to that planet. So what is it when Mercury's all up in your biz? You know, or Venus or Mars, or, you know, it's like you kind of getting extra overload of Mercury, right? And so maybe that's the thing, right? So I don't want to honor that it's not a thing. I mean, that's kind of ridiculous. I've actually been in that space before, and then you learn pretty quickly. And, you know, and interesting, Mercury is kind of seen usually as young people and androgynous people. I was telling a story last week about like, you know, having a fire on a beach and like Saturn showed up as a human, this old dude. There was one time where we were on another like sky ceremony, which always has you in the parking lot later than you're supposed to be. And our cars all got locked in, right? In Portland and Mount Tabor. And it was like, oh, so what are we like Uber home and like have to come get our cars tomorrow? And then this little kid showed up out of nowhere. I mean, not a little kid, it was like 16, 17-year-old, something like that. Like, dude, you need to know the back way. Right? It was just like this Mercury, like messenger, like magical messenger. Right? That's cool. Who brought the goods? So, all right. So here's the soul work, if you will. Continue the moon sun thing forever. But with Mercury on February 8th, I'll tell you in Pacific time where I currently sit, it's 5:48 a.m. I'll share a chart. Oh, an angel out there. Can you please set me up to share my screen? So 5:48 a.m. on February 8th, 2021, that's Pacific time. So please do your own conversion or cast your own chart. This is the chart for Mercury conjoined sun. Now this is going to happen for me. Remember that this horizontal line of the chart is the horizon. So at this time from where I sit, only the moon will be visible, right? This is before sunrise. This is really what we're going to talk about next week, like the so-called primary motion or the same or the sunwise motion. But so on this day, I'll wait for Mercury to be up above the horizon. He's still within a degree of the sun, which is this idea of cazimi. Some are more stringent and only give Mercury 17 arc minutes on either side of the sun. So here we're at 16 now. Mercury's retrograding, passing the sun this way. But the play is to go out there, to kind of soften your gait, close your eyes, like be with the sun and just like experience Mercury between you and the light with their eyes closed. Okay, don't burn your retinas. And then a good one too is to turn around and the sun will of course cast your shadow to the earth. And you can feel this alignment, which is sun, Mercury, me, earth. Or sun, Mercury, me, us. Okay, and even if we look at this chart, because these other planets are in the house, it's kind of like loosely, but it's like Saturn, Jupiter, Venus, Sun, Mercury, me, Earth. But specifically the state that's Mercury cazimi, right? It's Mercury between Earth and the Sun. And it's a really important part of the Mercury cycle, which is about 4 months long in general. It's like a seeding moment. And this is a longer story, but there's meta retrogrades where Mercury cycles are retrograding through the elements of the zodiac. And we have been in 6 consecutive Mercury cycles, which take 2 years, right? So all of 2020 and all of 2019, all of the retrograde dances have been devoted to the water element. And with this Aquarius Cazimi on February 8th, we now begin an Aquarius cycle, and we will have 6 consecutive air sign cycles. So all of the Mercury retrogrades in 2021 and 2022 will be devoted to the air. And this kind of, retrograding, we just had, of course, the Jupiter-Saturn conjunction on December solstice in that first degree of Aquarius. And we've talked much at Astrology Hub about how this is entering a new kind of elemental epoch of the Great Conjunction. And Mercury's kind of playing along, right? So what is the air? Right? Communication, thought, mind. It's the heart, I feel, is very much like the water. The will is very much the fire. The gut is very much the body, the senses, and then the air is very much the mind. That's a limited view and also very expansive, right? So we are kind of coming into where what I call our overmind, or maybe our collective consciousness, will be a little bit more tuned to the power of thought and the spells. And interestingly, instead of moving as we do through the zodiac from the air to the water, like from Aquarius to Pisces, Mercury's, this is the meta retrograde, he goes from one element backwards. And our friend Gary Caton wrote a wonderful book that everybody should check out if you want to deepen into this. It's called The Mercury Elemental Year. Gary Caton is C-A-T-O-N. He's been a guide for Astrology Hub, Inner Circle, a couple times now. And so check out that book. It's wonderful. And Gary offers many ceremonial ways to connect, to learn about your own Mercury elemental year. It's great. But so what I would say is this, like, what's your wish? And what's your offering? Right? What are the cookies and the carrots? And what are you asking Santa Mercury for? So he's coming close. This is the messenger, okay? He's coming close to Earth, and this is the day where he will be closest on February 8th. And it's happening at 20 degrees Aquarius. Let me turn this into like a natural zodiac wheel, so it seems a little bit less devoted to my local time zone, even though that's the time on the chart.
And Brett, would you focus or orient your wish and your offering around the air element? Like, would you bring that into it?
Definitely, for sure. And to the chart in general, right? So like, what do you have around, let me go back to the exact there. What do you have around 20 degrees Aquarius? What house is that for you? Depends how much astrology you speak. If you have a planet at 20 Leo, what is it to have something speaking opposite to that point? If you have something at, like my nodes are at 21 Scorpio Taurus. So it's squaring those points, right? And we could get really advanced. But basically, just in general, Aquarius, the revolution, the change, and look at this chart. Right? I mean, the coming new moon in Aquarius is like the most Aquarian chart I have seen. You get the new moon, you get Mercury retrograde, Venus, Jupiter, and Saturn, who traditionally is said to rule the sign, all in the sign of Aquarius, right? It's like a serious Aquarius planet party going on. So, what does Aquarius mean to you? I mean, this is your ascendant, right, Amanda? So that's a huge part of what's rising in you, I like to say, right? So how can Mercury, and Mercury retrograde, I like to take this literally, like he's bringing it back. What are some things that we haven't finished, or what are some things that, Anna helped me fix my website. I had some issues yesterday. And on some levels, it's like, oh, never do that on Mercury retrograde. It's like, no, we created it a while ago and it's messed up. So let's look back and fix it. I mean, it makes sense.
Yes, I've been doing it.
So there's plenty of ways where we hear all the great rewords with Mercury, right? So go there. But also I think, how do you want to be part of the revolution? How do you want new insights? How do you want to change Aquarius, your mind, Mercury? What patterns are you locked into? We've seen a lot of that recently, like, subconscious, habitual patterns tuned into, your line and whatever. Like, how do we want to shift that up? And also, like, I think coming back into our mind, are we seeing things clearly? What about information? How can we have a revolution if we're not receiving the real word and all that, And so what offering are you willing to bring? Well, maybe part of the YouTube circuit that I'm personally attracted to like isn't giving me the real news or whatever. Or maybe it's just keeping me so wired, right? And like awake that I'm cut off from the visions of my sleep. And this is literally this meta retrograde. We're coming back from the water, which is much more about the dream and all that, to the air. So how can we let our intuition, right? Like feelings, intuition, inform our mind and our thought and our consciousness when we're so busy thinking and on the computer all the time? So maybe one solid offering for this retrograde period would be, okay, I'm going to turn off the YouTube and go to BitChute or somewhere else that doesn't censor anyway, or just in general, turn it off and tune more into my dreams, make myself more available. And so when I'm in a place where like, oh, I want to listen to this information, you know, I like to turn things on when I'm washing the dishes at night or something. Well, maybe I don't do that and I just sing a mantra. Mm-hmm. Maybe I can make up a little song about like what I'm asking Mercury for. Mm-hmm. Right.
Even looking at the balance of information, you know, how much is what other people are telling you versus what you're dreaming into or what you're putting out with your own vision, your own thoughts. I've been paying attention to that too. That balance can get really off, and then you feel the effects of it. Like you're saying, maybe super wired or, and not as clear, those kinds of things.
Yeah, it's super powerful. I mean, you know, maybe I drink so much tea, right? Or maybe I want to cut the caffeine for a little bit because that has me too fast to like receive, right? So, I mean, importantly, Mercury retrograde is he's like speeding along and then he stops, turns it around. Right? I mean, like literally stops. Okay. And then turns it around and goes back. Importantly, there's a few things going on here. First of all, like just watch this. Let's say the proper zodiacal motion is from the star to the plant. Okay. So like this is just going through the signs. And then this would be retrograde. Actually, sorry, let me do it the other way. From the plant to the sun is direct. Okay. There's a time where he looks like he's coming right at you and he's actually not moving against that order, and then he's retrograde here, right? So actually in this model, Mercury's direct half the time and retrograde half the time, right? So this is like you're sitting and watching race cars, and you're drinking like Budweiser or whatever you're supposed to do, and you're just like zoom, right? And like half the time the cars are going that way, and then half the time they're going that way. And at some point they're kind of going away from you and sometimes towards you, and that's actually like stationed, because they're not going there or there. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So now if you were in the stands, that would be Earth's experience of Mercury. Half the time direct and half the time retrograde. But you're not in the stands, you're in a car. You're in a car that's slower than Mercury. And as Mercury's passing you by, you're getting that experience like in the stands, like he's going opposite the normal order. The outer planet retrogrades are way easier to describe because we've all had this experience where you've passed a car on the highway and it appears to be moving backwards for a time, which is a trip. And actually, when you're closest to it, it appears to be moving fastest backward. That's just how an outer planet retrograde works. Interestingly, you know, Mars, as we're experiencing Mars retrograde, Mars is experiencing Earth retrograde. For the same reason that, right? And so maybe he's angry about that, or, you know, he's getting some interference in that regard. And so that thing's just charged up. I really love to keep Earth in the picture, right? So like Mercury retrograde means on Mercury, it's Earth retrograde.
Wow. So, and it's a different visual than for Mercury retrograde than it is for the outer planet retrograde. Because of Mercury's position.
It's happening because of a different phenomena. And look, some of the superstition, if you will, that's tied to retrograde planets is because before the heliocentric revolution, or remembrance, maybe is a better way to say it, we couldn't explain why planets retrograde.
Right.
I mean, the mathematical models that were introduced, like maths were invented to just deal with this issue, and none of them work. And now that we understand that it is heliocentric and the Earth is passing these planets, not just that they're going around us, it's much easier to explain the retrograde motion. And Mercury, it is. It's just like this thing. But, you know, you would have to also be moving across your room because you're in a car, not in the stands. And you would see that it's a much shorter experience than like half the time. It's like 3 weeks out of 4 months about that Mercury is retrograde. Yeah. So there's a little bit of the astronomy with teacups and plants. And, you know, I love doing this with people when I'm out in person. It's like, we had a gathering once coming into the eclipse in 2017 where we are at my friend's hot springs in Idaho. And it's so great because we got to do like planetary retrogrades and cycles via our, you know, like synchronized swimming. So we had somebody be the sun in the middle and all the planets doing their different rhythms. And you can really experience like how these things are happening. It's so powerful. So I really appreciate kind of creating, not only like on my own desk and moving things around and like watching it from out there, but to like bring it down to this point of view. And I am a planet and it's just so powerful. And it's really fun, you know, it's like, we get giddy like kids and stuff. And you really have those kinds of breakthroughs that are available. Sometimes it would seem more to children who aren't so like locked in their ways. And
it would be really fun for the course coming up to have some suggestions for experiences that you can create so that you can actually feel it. Because I can see that once you have that experience of it, then it clicks. It's easy to understand. You're not going to forget it because you've experienced it. So it would be very powerful.
It becomes yours, and you don't have to experience what the teacher wants you to see. You experience how you see it, and that's when it's yours. Right?
Yes.
That's a harder thing to do on a screen than it is like on the big screen. The sky will teach you directly, or in some of these practices. Of course, for that to happen, we're going to have to come out of all these like lockdowns and that, right? And that actually might be a decent prayer for coming into these air cycles, kind of cleaning the air, or what we think about the air. In Aquarius and community, which is a thing that Aquarius is obviously often related to astrologically. All right, so what do I have to do to be able to connect again? And maybe some of that is, maybe when we're just like, oh, well, it's cool, I can actually attend more things because I'm stuck in my home, right? Maybe the more we feed that, the more we're pushing away, you know, the other side of this thing, which is us being able to be together as humans again, rather than just ones and O's connecting online and all that. Yeah, I mean, for me, there's going to be a lot of my own. So like, as much as I might be pulled towards some information that feels difficult and I want to know truth, but I can kind of manifest that. Like, what if I just go for like kind of easier information this time? Or just like, what is the information inside me? So if I cut off all external things that aren't like necessities, you know, what am I seeing in my meditations? What am I seeing in my dreams? And I think that this particular cycle is like a good cycle for that stuff to come through, if you're willing to bring an offering. So like caffeine is a great one, right? Like if you're so busy here, you can't ever really receive the message. Okay. So whatever you want to bring, like do it now and do it until Mercury's direct. That's your offering. And then like sit with your wish. It's okay to not have it right away. And then, but then bring that and speak it to the sun, and speak it not to the sun, but to Mercury, where the sun is your witness. You know, the sun like kind of illuminating Mercury. So he's there and can hear you. And you say, hey, I have offered you this, and I will maintain that fast until you're direct in that, you know, maybe longer. We'll see how it goes. So this is what I would like from you. And I don't expect to hear you speak English to me, but I would like a message about this. This is what I'm confused about. You know, bring me clarity. This is what I miss in this strange year. Help me, you know, have a revolution of bringing something back. We say to Mercury retrograde, right? Or change, we say to Aquarius. So there's a practice. And then I really like turning my back to the sun, feeling that sun, Mercury, me, Earth, all of us, and bringing my, you know, my intention here onto the planet. See what I mean?
So we start the offering potentially now, but on February 8th, we do this specific practice with the sun, where we're looking at our shadow, considering that it is the sun casting our shadow, but it goes sun, Mercury, me, and then us, Earth. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And that's when we actually have the official ceremonial conversation with Mercury, where we officially give our offering and we officially make some sort of wish.
Indeed.
All
and
right.
I'd say, and then maintain your fast until Mercury stations direct, which means he stops. You know, as I'm saying this, a hummingbird just landed in the tree over here.
Oh, nice. What a great Mercury symbol.
Thing to see, because they're so fast, you can't even see their wings, right? And then when they land, it's like, do you like that? Like, does this feel like a good chance to rest for you? Do you feel like you're not being a hummingbird, or my projection of a hummingbird? You know, if any planet doesn't like moving, it's probably Mercury or Mars, you know? So you can imagine, like, yeah, I mean, when Saturn stops to retrograde, he's probably like, this is just my speed. Like, but Mercury, like, you know, he's meant to be quick and he wants to get it done, you know? And we've really been encouraged to have these fast minds, but, you know, sometimes it's like the fastest mind that limits the fast thought, if you will. Mm-hmm. And that can be also with astrology, which can be linked into this Aquarian realm too. When we get too deep into the electional astrology and you can't do anything during a retrograde or a void moon or whatever. I mean, I just did a, you know, wedding electional for some clients today. And it's like, how long is it going to take us to get to a moment where like it used to just be like, oh, what is it, a Saturday or Sunday? Like what month works for people? You know, now it's like calling on the powers of other things. And it's good, but sometimes like electional astrology can really handcuff our intuition. Mm. And so I think that this, like all those themes, at least for me, that's really alive in this particular shift. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Brett, do you want to do the story next time?
Yeah, let's do that, because we got 13 minutes on my
okay. All right.
Very good Mercury number, actually. If you look at your 13th solar return, you'll find an interesting thing from Mercury. Right, so let's tell this old tale.
So basically, we're going to hear which story right now?
This is Hermes steals Apollo's herd.
So this is the story of Mercury, essentially?
Yeah, it's one of the many. This is the story of Mercury's first day of life. Okay. And, you know, there's a little backstory. There's a lot of backstory. Apollo was like banished to the earth. He was serving a penance for, killing a bunch of Cyclops, which he did because it said Jupiter or Zeus killed his son, Asclepius, because Asclepius raised the dead. He became such a good healer. And like Zeus is just like, dude, not like against the rules, like you're done. And then Apollo just like lashed out because Zeus had taken his son. And so he like went after a bunch of the Cyclops and the 100-handed ones who make Zeus's thunderbolts. And that didn't fly with dad, right? So then Apollo was like, all right, you're going to serve a year like as a human, you know, under this king as a shepherd, right? But, you know, so I don't know who drove the solar chariot during that year or how that works. But I think on some level, Apollo gets to slow down, work on the flute, you know, the master of musicians. That's one of the first things that Hermes heard as a baby. Hermes' mother is Maya. You know, an interesting thing is that in India, they call Hermes Buddha. And it's not like the Buddha, it's a different thing. But interestingly, the Buddha's mother's name was Maya. And Maya is like the illusion, the matrix, you know? So I always love to say, if Buddha is the son of Maya, then, you know, enlightenment is born of the illusion, which might also be a cool thing of considering, you know, moving from the water back to the air here. So Maya was one of the seven sisters, the Pleiades, one of these bright, shining, beautiful goddesses, and was really honored for that. And she didn't like that so much. She didn't want like the celebrity life. So she chose to live on Earth, and she chose to live in this cave. And it said that Zeus visited her there, away from the ever watchful gaze of Hera. And that one of these visits produced a seed that was born as the one we call Hermes. And so Hermes was born in this cave on Earth. And very bright, amazing, you know, sharp wit, semi-divine one, yeah, or maybe fully, depending on who you ask. And he was being raised by these wood nymphs. And he, on the first like moments of his birth, he invented that whole like stuff a bunch of blankets together so it looks like somebody's in your crib that you just snuck out of thing, right? That was maybe Hermes' first of his many great inventions. He sneaks out of this cave, and then he comes across this tortoise, which he liberated from its shell, we'll say. And now he has a drum. He's as he's walking around, and he hears his flute in the background. He's drumming along. And maybe Apollo was like so entranced by this like ghost rhythm that was like accompanying his flute playing that he just forgot, and he was just in the moment, and he just got all jazzed out. And who knows, because he didn't notice then that Hermes stole this herd that he was meant to be protecting. And Hermes, you know, the trickster and a very bright young one, he realized that he can't only steal these cows, but he was going to have to trick Apollo so he couldn't see where they had gone. And so it said he put bark on their hooves and on his own feet, and that he walked them to a place. He like walked them backwards, right? And then took them to the cave, right? So you hear in that backwards motion, this retrograde motion. And he brought the cows then to a field near this cave. And that's where they would remain, except for two of them, who it said that he slayed. Because a couple of things. One, he needed some of their guts to make strings, because this is when Hermes invented harmony. By stringing some of the guts of this cow across that tortoise shell, and he created the harp, right? Some say 3 strings, some say 7 for the 7 planets. And it said that he gave offerings of those cows, and that in this way he kind of created sacrifice. And then he's back in the cave with his little turtle harp, and you know, kind of giggling about the whole thing, as Hermes will, until Apollo comes in, maybe the next day. And he's like, hey, you know, where's the cows? And there were a couple of their skins hanging near the cave door. And he points to the baby. And he's like, tell me where my cows are. And these wood nymphs are like, dude, that's like a 1-day-old baby. Like, he can't even like speak, let alone walk or steal cows. Are you mad? But everybody knows wood nymphs don't steal cows. Like, that's preposterous. So of course it's this child. And then Hermes gives himself away because he starts giggling, because he thinks this thing's just absolutely hilarious, right? And Apollo's like, what did you do, right? And Hermes kind of like lied about it. And then Hermes tells him, don't worry, like I sacrificed to the gods. And Apollo's like, what? He's like, oh, I can see that makes sense. He's like, yeah. He's like, I did 12 offerings. And he said, 12, there's 11 of us. And Hermes goes, oh no, I ate my piece, right? Declaring himself a god. And this was too much for Apollo. So Apollo's like, no, you're going to go see Zeus. And he takes him up to Olympus. And Zeus hears the story, and he's trying not to kind of laugh about the thing himself, right? And Apollo doesn't know that this is Zeus's child, like nobody does. So this is Apollo's brother in that sense, or at least half brother. And he's like, look, this kid stole, he lied, and then he blasphemed. He called himself a god, and he must be punished. But then Hermes starts playing this music. And in some versions, this happened before he took him to Apollo. He plays this music on this amazing thing. And this is the god of music himself, Apollo, right? But he had a flute. And nobody had heard one instrument play 2 notes at the same time, or 3 notes, like chords. He invented a harmony, you know? And so Apollo's, what is that thing? So I don't know. I was like, you know, that's why I took those cows, you know, and this tortoise shell. And what do you call it? He's like, I must have it. He's like, well, and Hermes made a trade for it with him. He said, all right, like, I'll give you this old thing. Call it whatever you want. And you tell me how you found this cave. because I know you didn't follow those cows' footprints. Right. And Apollo's like, yeah, how'd you do that? Right. So I'm not going to tell. It's like, well, how'd you find me? He's like, oh, I cast lots, because Apollo's the god of divination too. Right. And Hermes said, all right, I'll give you this instrument if you show me that. Show me your magic. Show me divination. And Apollo instructed him and received the instrument. That it said he named the lyre after the young being, the lying being who created it. So maybe that went down before they're in front of Zeus. And Zeus says, look, it's not okay to lie, right? It's not okay to steal. Maybe you are a god, because Hermes is like, look, man, I can do better with animals than this guy. He's like sleeping on the job, right? I should be the god of commerce. Like, I literally just traded this guy a tortoise shell for divination. Are you serious? Right? And he's like, look, I'm really fast and I'm bright. I'm only 1 day old. Look at all these things I'm doing. Like, I could be your messenger. And Zeus is like, okay. And he goes, look, you have to promise that you're not going to lie like that. And Hermes, well, I can't promise I'll tell the whole truth. To which Zeus is like, I would never ask you to. And so it was. And so Hermes was issued his boots with the wings and his cap and became the messenger and the steward of commerce, which includes thieves, and also a shepherd of animals and all these other things, where Apollo got to keep that harp and maybe go serve some more time as a shepherd and figure out how to play harmony. Okay. All right, so now let's tie this together astronomically in a few minutes. And I want you to remember back to our first episode where we talked about here's Jupiter and Saturn, and now they disappear. Why? Because the sun chases them down. But can you see how that's Jupiter and Saturn going into the cave? So it's a very interesting thing that from Earth's point of view, from my point of view, when planets get close to the light, that's when I go blind to them. Because, you know, the sun is just this hole in the heaven where the one light shines through, and it's so blinding and so powerful. It is all powerful. And when planets are too close, gone. Like Mercury's setting after the sun right now, but there's no hope for me because it's combust. It's all that bright, all the beams, right? So my argument is that this is an astronomical story, and that Jupiter visiting the cave is this thing that happens every 399 days, which is called the Sun-Jupiter conjunction. And the about 15 days before and after, a little bit longer, where the sun is coming in to get so close to Jupiter. Now Jupiter disappears as an evening star. The sun conjoins Jupiter, where we've just been on full moon. And then the sun will move far enough beyond that now Jupiter's rising before the sun is a morning star. Okay. So you don't see Jupiter. He's visiting the cave away from Hera's watchful gaze, the queen of the heavens, right, of the stars. And then out comes Mercury, right? And that's what happens before Mercury retrogrades. Is a very important thing to say here, which is that Mercury in this retrograde period will move from evening star, where we saw him, you saw him with your eyes, and I showed a bunch of pictures, right? And then he will retrograde, he will dive under the beams as he's going between Earth and the sun, and then he will show up as a morning star. And that's kind of like the fresh-faced trickster babe, right? Who then, right? So what? Anyway, then Mercury in his 4-month thing, he'll eventually go behind the sun. He'll go under the beams that way, literally be behind the sun, where I'll say he's initiated and matured. And then he comes back out as the evening star, which is like the bearded sage, Hermes Trismegistus. And then it all begins again. He goes retrograde, right? So he comes out, right? You got Jupiter being swallowed by the sun, Jupiter into the cave, and then Mercury just pops out, and he's born as this being. Although I maybe contradict myself because I just called that the sage, and this is the young child, but he's already pretty wise. And he goes up and then he retrogrades back, which is moving the cows backwards. Mm. So this really likely is describing astronomy based not in this Aquarius zone of the sky, but in the Taurus because he's moving the cows backwards. And most importantly, like in the constellation Taurus, signs and constellations are different things, something we will really get to down the road. But the Pleiades in Maya is one of these stars. They sit on the back of the bull of the heavens, right? So this likely is a time when Jupiter was with Maya in the cave. So Jupiter, Pleiades, and the sun all conjoined. And then Mercury. So like I literally can rewind the clock and figure out when in time this story came out of. But right now, there is one really important element that's not usually here with a Mercury retrograde. It's like Jupiter goes into the cave and Mercury comes out of it. Mercury walks the cows backwards. And then what happens? Apollo, who is the sun, brings him up to the heavens, so rising to see Zeus. Right? Because what happens? Jupiter. Who is Jupiter?
You're using Zeus and Jupiter interchanged.
Yeah, it's a thing we do, my bad. But, you know, so it's the Latin and the Greek. But yeah, so after, right, it's just like what's happening right now. Jupiter's here as an evening star. The sun came in. Jupiter goes into the cave. Mercury pops out. He's born. He goes retrograde. And then the sun, because now at this point, the sun will have passed Jupiter far enough by that when Mercury becomes visible as a morning star, and this will be sky-venger hunt for the next week after this one, like you see Mercury appear as a morning star and Jupiter's there waiting for him, and it's the Apollo, it's the rising sun bringing Mercury to go have this council with Jupiter, where he's like, hey, this kid stole, he lied, he called himself a god, right? And Mercury's like, okay, you're Jupiter's like, you're my guy, right? And by the way, probably, hey, this is your brother, so be cool. They've been really great friends ever since. I mean, like Mercury and Apollo, you know, we say that Mercury is the messenger for Zeus or for Jupiter, but it's really from our point of view, and every planet's point of view, Mercury's always so close to the sun because he's the planet that's closest to the sun. So Mercury is just consistently, from Earth's point of view, he can never get further than 28 degrees away. And he's just kind of on the evening side, and then he retrogrades and he's a morning star, and then he goes under the beams behind the sun, and he's an evening star, and it's just like that every 4 months. But it's much less rare for Jupiter to be on the scene. So we have a couple pieces of this mythological puzzle that's not just some story, right? But is an astronomical transmission. And if we can find the time when they all do this with the Pleiades, and especially in the Greek times, we will probably find the very astronomical event that inspired this wonderful story. So things that I hope this story otherwise will relate to people is this is a time for commerce. Make a deal. Bring something to Hermes that you made and ask for something. Many of us are studying astrology. And modern astrologers will associate Uranus with astrology. Okay, but not in the day. Hermes is the one that brought us number, language, words, spells, divination, all these things, right? Like he learned it from the sun and he brought it to us, or she brought it to us. So this is a really wonderful time. Them is probably the right pronoun for Mercury anyway, to like go out there and say, hey, I want to know more of these mysteries. And that's actually, I would say, more promising to speak that to Mercury at a time Mercury cannot be seen, because we're engaging with mysteries that are things that exist beyond the veil and light language. So being when Mercury's with the sun, you know, and being willing to do the shadow work to ask for that. Well, what are you willing to bring? I mean, maybe it's just like, hey, I'm going to study astrology 2 hours a day. I'm going to actually read these books that I keep buying or whatever. Maybe that's an offering. Right? We are moving into air signs. I'm gonna start a study group. That's a good Aquarian thing, right? So my offering to you is I'm gonna gather your disciples, right? I'm gonna come together in a group, and we are going to study astrology together, look at these things we're learning in the inner circle, whatever it will be, speak with one another, do charts together, and I offer that to you. Will you give me more information, more knowledge, better than information, more understanding of this astrological art, you know? And soon we'll have this opportunity to literally see Mercury reborn as a morning star, right at Jupiter's side. And Jupiter will give them the blessings to come out as a messenger for all of us.
Wow. That is really, really cool. I don't think I've heard any of the myths explained astronomically. I'm guessing that we're going to get to do more of this. Is Mercury the most obvious, or do you have other ones that are obvious as well?
The first that I learned, and I was taught this from Shamanic Astrology Mystery School, was the story of Inanna, which is the Sumerian.
Right, Venus. Okay. Mm-hmm.
Which is very much the story of Earth's experience of Venus and the sun over her 19-month cycle.
That's
and
right.
So I was already hip to like, oh, well, maybe that's true for some of these other myths. Rapunzel is a really cool Venus-Mars story that actually this summer will probably give us a good opportunity to explore.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, there's a lot of these things. And, I was going to tell this story. I was on Seeds of Life with Anna, Seeds of Light, last week. And I was going to tell this story as an example of it's so great to teach kids some of the astrological language through myth. But do I really want to tell a story about killing a turtle, killing some cows, like lying, all these things? It's so difficult. And that's like, a much more pleasant story than most of the myths. So what I find is actually, if we can unpack them astronomically in this way, or spiritually, they all have different intents, then we can probably rewrite them in such a way that they actually do honor the intent of the transmission, right? We're not just watering it down, but
right.
How can we honor the intent of the transmission, but maybe recreate some of it that's like too tricky for some of the kids? So that's another thing that I'm up to, and that I've actually asking Mercury to guide me with.
Oh, good. I mean, Inanna is a very, very powerful myth that my Madeline 12 completely connected with. And when I brought it to Venus in the sky, it just blew the whole thing out for her. Like, it really made a huge difference. And what you just did with Mercury, same. It's like when I hear some of these stories, I'm like, okay, that's a cute, cool story. Awesome. But when you just tied it to the actual movement in the sky, I don't know what it is, but there's some dimension that fills in that makes it matter. It makes it like, okay, there's a point to this beyond that's a cute, funny little, myth. And I can pull spiritual things from it, but that just tied it to something tangible, something real.
Yeah, thanks. And it is really tangible right now because it's actually happening with Jupiter. Now, Mercury was a preemie. Like, I saw Mercury before Jupiter went into the cave. So how'd that go down, right? But sometimes it's really going to be right on. And regardless, like on the other side, as Jupiter soon will be reborn, if you will, as a morning star, and then Mercury will dive in there, retrograded. He's going to station direct right between Jupiter and Saturn. And we might actually get to see the three of them doing this, right?
Wow.
But now we have this context of like, oh, I see. That's Apollo bringing Mercury to Jupiter. And he says, literally, station direct, like, go out and be the messenger.
Right? Oh, that's so cool.
So all these things, as we're planting these seeds now, we're literally setting up, unlike a new moon where we get a month to work on that intention, this is a 4-month thing.
Wow.
Right. So yeah, be really intentional. The next time Mercury will be Kazemi will be during the Gemini solar eclipse within May or June. So it's a 4-month thing. So yeah, be intentional about it, and may the messenger bring you highest magic.
Wonderful. Brett, thank you so much for this. So we have our assignment February 8th. Well, right now we can be thinking about our offering. February 8th, we can be doing our official ceremonial offer plus request. Keeping it in the air element will help you make that request in alignment with the actual energy of this Mercury retrograde. Plan to continue your offer through the end of the retrograde, which is the 20th, right? February 20th. Yeah. And what else? There's so much here. So good. And what I'm finding about these episodes is you tell the stories or you give us the assignment, and then it's very much an experience. So now just be with the information and see what comes through.
Yeah, and I hope people who are watching this will comment as it's going. That's been happening. I try to check in with them. I see Amanda's checking in with them, but also that you'll come back, like, you know, after you have your experience, and write a comment, whether it's here live where we're broadcasting on Facebook or on the YouTube page where it is. I'd like to find a place where we can maybe set up kind of a community share around that. But of course, you can do that at the Astrology Hub Global Forecast community for now, or you know, reach out. Some of you guys have been sending me some really cool experience that you've been having playing these scavenger hunt games throughout time. There's a really brilliant message I just read about how this is the first time somebody's noticed that where they are at this time of the year, the waxing moon means the moon heading in a specific direction. And I won't go on, but like brilliant. So it's just, as I say, like, you go to the sky teaches you. And all these little things in my own trickster way, I'm trying to bring some invitations that will also help you see more than the thing that I'm asking you to go look for. So we'll see how that goes.
It's so perfect. Thank you so much, Brett. Thank you, everybody, for being here. Thank you for being a part of our community. It's such a pleasure to share this space with you. We're so grateful for your sincere curiosity and your interest and your enthusiasm and your passion. And we know that this is a time to be exploring those things. And it's so fun to do that together. So thank you for being with us. And thank you, as always, for making astrology a part of your life. We'll catch you on the next episode. Take care, everybody.
Amanda, I think we did 1 hour and 11 minutes. So
nice. Oh my gosh, that's great. That's so cool. Awesome. Okay, take care, everybody.